I was recently watching a news clip, and it was on Easter Sunday, and of course they were showing a clip of the Pope. And the Pope was on the balcony, and he was addressing literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And those people were just absolutely adoring him. Many of them bowed down and virtually worshiped the man. But did you know, as I watched that in the worship services of that organization, they use a whole lot of symbols. Now, we may not see or know what those symbols are, but thousands of years ago, pagan religions used symbols to show which gods, and I say many gods, they worship. These symbols were declared openly in Egypt, Babylon, Rome, and other cultures. And these symbols are still used today, but today their true meanings are hidden. Most people typically don't notice the symbols, or they have a positive impression of them. They've been twisted and turned to look like they're Christian or religious. The enlightened, or those that understand the meaning behind the symbols, and they use them to communicate with others. Members of a true Christian church should not have anything to do with the symbols of pagan gods. In 2 Corinthians 6, verses 14 and 16, in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 and 16, we say, "For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God." So I want you to notice, I don't have time to elaborate since this is a short sermonette, on some of the symbols used by the Catholic Church and the priests that administer the various churches around the world. There's a few symbols that they use. And Zucchetti, I'll spell it for you, Zucchetti, which is worn by the priests, the cardinals, and the Pope. It represents respect and fear and submission to Cybele, Cybele, the mother goddess of Rome. Now that little cap looks something like this. You all can see it here. You people on the screen probably can't. It's a little round cap that sits right on the back of the head. And you can see that the Pope has one as well. It's just a little different color than the one we have here. The cap of Cybele is one of the oldest and most sacred pagan religious symbols of all humanity. It dates back over 2000 BC. The skull cap was worn by the sun priests of Egypt. It's a thin, slightly rounded skull cap, now commonly known by various titles, including the Yarmulke, which is Jewish, and the Kufi, known as from the Muslims. They wear them too. The Roman Catholic Church calls it the Zucchetti. Vatican Hill was the site of the largest ancient temple to Cybele. Astaroth, the goddess of fertility, sexuality, and war, was known as Cybele in Rome. They actually worshipped her. Now the Bible warns against worshiping her. In Judges 10 and verse 6, it says, "Then the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals," more than one, "and the Ashtaroths." In 1 Corinthians 11:7, the Bible declares, "For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God." So it does make you wonder why it is that large Christian organization's leading minister wears it. Now there's another one that follows right along behind that. It's called a mitre. The mitre hat, it's a hat that wears on their head. It's worn by the Catholic priests, cardinals, and the Pope. What does it represent? It's symbolic. And that, that's what the Babylonian mystery religion is. It's based upon symbols that the people weren't supposed to understand. You're just supposed to worship. And the people today are just worshiping this organization or this man as if he were God. This hat represents Dagon, the Babylonian fish god. Now there's a tradition that years ago a big egg dropped out of the sky and came up out of the sea, and that's how man got started. But this Babylonian fish god, the ancient Babylonians worshiped Dagon, the god of agriculture, or food, plenty of food, and good fortune. The Babylonian priests wore a headdress that represented the worship of Sabel and Dagon. It featured an open fish mouth, with his mouth open like this, and the rest of the fish draped down behind, and the rest of the fish forming a cloak down behind his back. In the Roman Empire, it was worn by the head priest of Sabel, the Magna Mater, M-A-G-N-A, M-A-T-E-R, or the great queen mother or goddess. I have a little picture here. You can see up here at the top is the fish, and down at the bottom is the mitre, the hat that the Pope wears. You ever wonder why it's open like that, shaped like a fish? Today, the Catholic cardinals, bishops, and the Pope all wear the open fish mouth mitre, which represents the worship of Sabel and Dagon. The mitre hat of Dagon is always worn with the zucchetti that we described earlier, of Asheroth and Sabel. God warned the Jews not to worship the gods of Babylon. In Jeremiah 1, verse 16, he said, I will pronounce my judgments on them concerning all their wickedness, whereby they have forsaken me and have offered sacrifices to other gods and worshiped the works of their own hands. And I'll give you one other one. The other one is the obelisk. The obelisk in St. Peter's Square represents the worship of the sun god. We actually have one of those in Washington, D.C. At one time, I understand, it was the tallest structure in the United States, and maybe the tallest structure in the world, Washington Monument, if you want to get an idea of what it looks like. Obelisks were prominent in the architecture of the ancient Egyptians, who placed them at the very entrance of all their temples, marking it as a zone of sun worship. They represent the sun god called Ra, R-A, the Egyptians' greatest deity, the creator of all humanity, they say, the source of all heat and light, the being on which man was totally dependent. Do you ever wonder who they're trying to represent? Well, of course, God, Ra, is representing God Almighty. An Egyptian obelisk sits in front of the Pantheon of ancient Rome, which housed statues of their pagan gods. The obelisk was originally constructed by Pharaoh Ramesses II for the temple of Ra in Heliopolis. It was brought to Rome in ancient times, where it was used near a shrine to the Egyptian god Isis. The Pantheon was dedicated to Pantheos, meaning all the gods. You ever hear of Peter Pan? That reverts back to some paganism as well. When it became a Roman Catholic church, it was dedicated to the Virgin Mary and all the martyrs. The most well-known Egyptian obelisk was re-erected. It was actually taken down and re-erected in 1586 AD in front of St. Peter's Basilica. It is surrounded by a sun wheel, with the points lining up with the vernal equinox and the summer solstice and the winter solstice. They worship the sun. During the sunrise on the vernal equinox, the sun causes the obelisk to cast its shadow toward the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, which represents the sexual union of the sun god and the moon goddess. God's second commandment says in Exodus 20, verses 4 and 5, You shall not make for yourselves a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. These are only a few of the symbols used by the Roman Catholic Church in their worship services. They call it Christian. But if it looks like a duck, and it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, I always heard that it was still a duck. Likewise, if it's pagan, and it looks pagan, and it acts pagan, then it's got to be pagan. Don't be deceived, as many billions have been.